It started with whispers. "She looks lost," one of the candidates said, eyes trailing the young black woman as she stepped into the waiting lounge on the 47th floor. Ava Harris didn't flinch. She clutched her worn-out leather notebook and glanced around. High-rise glass walls, polished oak floors, suits so stiff they barely moved. She didn't look like them. No brand-name heels, no glossy handbag, no blow-dried perfection. Just a wrinkled white blouse, a plain gray skirt, and natural curls pulled into a soft puff. A group of white applicants leaned in toward each other. Did she come to drop off resumes for someone else? Maybe she's early for the housekeeping shift, another laughed under his breath. They weren't even subtle. A white woman with sharp eyeliner and a rose gold laptop tilted her phone slightly, pretending to check the time, but the lens was aimed straight at Ava. One seat remained in the far corner. Ava walked over slowly and sat. Her flats made a soft thud on the marble floor. She didn't react when someone nearby scoffed. Corporate interviews are getting so inclusive, a tall guy with a luxury watch mumbled, sarcasm thick in his voice. Someone chuckled, I guess she's here for that diversity quota. Ava opened her notebook, the pages crinkled and worn. She didn't speak. Her hands were steady, her breathing calm. Then came the coffee. A white woman in designer heels walked past Ava with her cup, then spun slightly like she'd lost balance. The coffee tilted. Brown liquid splashed onto Ava's lap. "Oh my God," the woman gasped, eyes wide with mock concern. "I'm so sorry. It totally slipped." The others turned. Some half stood to get a better look. A few raised their phones again. Ava looked down at her skirt. The fabric had turned dark brown, soaking quickly. Still, she said nothing. She folded her notebook, placed it gently in her lap, and reached into her bag for a tissue. "Oh, honey, let me help you," the woman said, bending forward with a napkin, but her smile gave it away. She wasn't sorry. "Bet that notebook's ruined," someone muttered. The tall guy with the watch whispered, "She better hope her cleaning job's still open." Ava met his eyes for one brief second. No anger, no shame, just silence. One of the receptionists approached with a towel, hesitating. "Do you need assistance, ma'am?" Ava simply shook her head. "I'm fine, thank you." "Want us to move your seat?" the woman asked, clearly nervous. "No need," Ava replied, wiping the edge of her skirt. Across the room, a man with gelled hair chuckled and said loud enough for the room, "Should have known better than to bring her in here with a coffee hazard." "Hope she's not here to pitch anything serious," someone else added. "I mean, handwritten notes?" Everyone laughed. Ava stayed silent. Her soaked skirt clung to her legs. The ink on her notebook had started to run, but she never looked away, never snapped back, just sat there, back straight, eyes forward. One white woman leaned over to her friend. "You think she even knows what company this is?" "Probably thought it was open walk-ins," her friend giggled. And then a flash. Someone took a picture. Of the mess? Of Avenue? Another whisper. "She'll be a great story for lunch later." Ava didn't blink. Her fingers traced the edge of her notebook slowly, then stilled. A deep breath. No response. Just silence. And in that silence, the room grew louder. But she remained still, dignified, drenched, and dangerously overlooked. The room buzzed again, but Ava sat still. One woman across the table fixed her lipstick using her phone's front camera and scoffed. If she thinks sitting there quietly will help her, she's in the wrong place. Her friend leaned in, whispering, She's probably HR's cousin or something. How else would someone like that end up here? Ava opened her notebook slowly. Some pages were soaked, but most were still usable. Her pen moved calmly as she wrote something down. No one saw what it was. "Is she seriously writing in that thing?" A man in a gray blazer whispered. "What is this? 2005? The group around him laughed. One of them raised an eyebrow and said, "Nah, she's sketching out her resignation from wherever she came from." Ava kept writing. No eye contact. No trembling. Her expression calm, posture straight, as if she was the only one in the room not performing. "Bet she's here for the admin role," someone muttered. "HR probably told her the wrong room." "I don't even think she's here for an interview," said the woman in the white turtleneck. "She hasn't said a word." "She doesn't have to," someone chuckled. "That skirt already said, 'Not qualified.'" A young white guy with a startup badge leaned toward another candidate. "You think we should tell her this is the creative executive panel?" "Nah," the woman beside him replied. "Let her embarrass herself." Ava's eyes lifted briefly, scanning the rows of identical resumes spread out on the conference table. Everyone had their leather portfolios open like weapons. She kept her notebook closed now, resting lightly on her lap. Someone whispered, "You think she knows who she's sitting next to?" "That's Clara Kingsley. Her dad runs like half the ad agencies on the East Coast." Another voice followed. "And that's Blake Caldwell. The guy's done campaigns for Nike, Apple, you name it." Someone glanced at Ava and smirked. "Meanwhile, she looks like she printed her resume at a library kiosk." The room fell into a rhythm of smugness and strategy. One candidate clicked through slides on her tablet. Another rehearsed lines under his breath. A man in the back popped breath mints like he was going on camera. No one talked to Ava. She didn't tap her pen, didn't shift nervously. She just observed. A white woman in a navy skirt walked by, looked at Ava's wet lap, and wrinkled her nose. Poor thing. This whole day must be a disaster for her. The guy beside her shrugged. "Can't fix first impressions." A staffer in a white shirt walked in quietly and started checking the AV equipment. He paused near Ava, noticed her soaked skirt, and hesitated. "Ma'am, can I get you a fresh towel or—" She shook her head once. "I'm okay." He nodded awkwardly and walked away. Near the window, Blake whispered, "Man, imagine being her. Sitting in this room with actual legends." Someone behind him added, "She'll probably post this later on Twitter like, 'Corporate America is so hostile.'" Everyone laughed again. Ava's fingers traced a tiny water stain on her notebook cover, then stopped. She finally looked up. Not at anyone, just at the screen at the front of the room. It was still blank, waiting for something to begin. And they all kept assuming she was waiting to be allowed in. But she wasn't waiting. She was watching. And they didn't even notice. The silence didn't last long. The white woman who'd spilled the coffee earlier stood up to stretch. She turned toward Ava and smiled sweetly. "I really do hope your day gets better. These interviews can be overwhelming." The sarcasm sat heavy in the air. Ava didn't respond. The woman leaned down and whispered, just loud enough, "But maybe next time, skip the blouse from a thrift store." A few stifled chuckles rippled through the room. The tall man in the Versace cufflinks leaned back in his chair and tapped his pen loudly. "Hey, someone should grab her a napkin, or maybe a LinkedIn tutorial." The man beside him laughed. "Bro, She probably applied through Craigslist. Ava sat still, her notebook closed, her lap still damp. Then came the final strike. Another candidate, white, sharp-suited, the type who looked like he rehearsed arrogance, stood up and walked to the refreshment table. He grabbed a plastic cup of water, turned around slowly, and made his way back past Ava. "Careful this time," someone joked. He smirked. And then, just as he passed behind her chair, he tripped, or pretended to. The water flew forward, splashing across Ava's shoulder and down her back. Gasps. A pause. Then more laughter. "Oh my God, are you okay?" the man said, acting surprised. "I swear I slipped. These floors are too polished." A woman near the window laughed into her hand. "These spills just love her, huh?" The man with the Versace cufflinks shook his head. "She's a magnet for mess." The white woman who'd spilled the coffee earlier smiled and added, "Maybe she's cursed. Or maybe the universe is just trying to tell her something." Ava slowly stood up, water dripping from her blouse. She didn't yell, didn't speak. She just opened her notebook, checked a name on a list, and closed it again. A few people noticed. Most didn't care. Another man whispered, "That's it. She's writing a Yelp review on all of us." Someone else chuckled. "Or a blog post titled, 'How I Survived Corporate Racism.'" Phones came out again. A few candidates acted like they were texting, but their cameras were aimed low and steady. One person whispered, "She'll be a meme by tonight." At the front of the room, a woman rehearsing her pitch frowned and looked toward Ava. "Hey," she said, half serious, "if you're not here for this position, maybe let the rest of us focus." Ava didn't respond. She just pulled her wet sleeve away from her skin and sat back down. A white man muttered, "She probably thinks we're being mean because she's black." And someone else added, "No, we're being mean because she showed up like she was delivering food." Laughter exploded again. Even the receptionist chuckled under her breath before realizing Ava saw her. That moment of eye contact made her look away fast. One woman in a tight black dress leaned over to Blake. "I bet she didn't even go to college." He grinned. "I bet she thinks this is a free workshop." Phones now buzzed quietly with shared group texts. Someone zoomed in on the water stain across Ava's back. "She'll cry in the elevator later," someone whispered. Ava opened her notebook again. She flipped past soaked pages until she reached a clean one. Then she wrote something quickly and closed it again. The tall guy beside her leaned in just slightly. "What are you writing?" he asked with a fake smile. "A complaint letter? A poem? Or just your grocery list?" Ava looked him in the eye, calm, controlled. "Observations," she said simply. He blinked. "Huh?" But before she could respond, before anyone could laugh again, the conference room door clicked. Footsteps. And everything changed. The door opened with a slow, deliberate click. A hush fell over the room as if the oxygen had shifted. A tall black woman stepped in. Power radiated from her like heat. Her charcoal gray suit was tailored to perfection. Her heels echoed softly against the polished floor. She wore no smile, just the kind of quiet authority that didn't need one. The receptionist straightened instantly. Everyone else turned. The woman's gaze swept across the room, not in a rush, not in judgment, just scanning, measuring, remembering. Then she spoke. "Thank you all for being here today." Her voice was smooth, low, and absolute. "But before we begin, I have one question." She turned and looked directly at Ava. Everyone turned too, as if they suddenly remembered she existed. The silence cracked. "Miss Ava Harris," the woman said, her tone unwavering. "Are you all right? Did someone spill something on you?" The moment shattered. Clara, the white woman who dumped the coffee, froze. Her lips parted, but no sound came out. The man with the Versace cufflinks stopped tapping his pen. Blake stiffened in his chair, like someone had grabbed him by the spine. Ava stood slowly, her posture graceful, despite the dried coffee and water stains. "I'm fine," she said quietly. The woman nodded once, then turned back to the room. Her next words dropped like stones. "I appreciate your honesty over the past 30 minutes," she said. "Your comfort, your assumptions, your behavior." Confusion flickered across some faces, nervous smiles. "I wanted to see how you'd behave when no one was watching," she continued, "when you thought someone didn't matter, when you believed no one had power." The Versace guy blinked rapidly. Clara looked like she wanted to melt into her seat. "I asked Miss Harris to come in this morning under no title, no introduction," the woman said. "Just herself, no armor, no announcement." She paused. "And what you all did told us more than your resumes ever could." Silence again. Then she smiled, but only slightly. "Because Miss Ava Harris," she said, stepping aside, "isn't here for an interview." She turned to Ava. "She's your new chief executive officer." You could hear it, that sound of breath catching in every throat. The air inside the room collapsed. Clara's eyes widened, her face losing every shade of color. The man in the gray blazer dropped his pen. Blake sat completely still, blinking at Ava like he'd never seen her before. Ava stepped forward slowly. Her shoes barely made a sound, but the room roared with panic. She walked to the head of the table, the spot that had been left vacant, and sat, calm, drying stains still on her blouse, notebook still damp, but posture perfect. The HR director remained standing. "For those of you wondering," she said, "Miss Harris was appointed CEO last week. After 10 years as the lead systems strategist, she now leads Veriton Global's entire executive branch." No one moved. The woman continued. "She's the one who built the internal framework you all praise, the communication platform that scaled our market value, the hiring matrix that restructured our brand." Ava opened her notebook. She flipped past soaked pages, found the one she'd written on just moments earlier, ran her finger across a line of names. She looked up. "I've spent the last 45 minutes listening," she said softly, "and I've heard enough." The white man beside her tried to chuckle. "Look, it was all in good fun. We thought—" She cut him off with a look. Just one glance. The sound died in his throat. She turned to the room. "I don't care where you went to school or what campaigns you've led. I care about how you treat people when you think they're beneath you." Someone sniffled. Another candidate looked down at her lap, lips trembling. Ava continued. "This notebook isn't filled with qualifications. It's filled with character notes. How you spoke, what you assumed, how quickly you laughed when you thought someone was safe to mock." The silence was now shame. No one tried to speak. No one dared. Ava leaned forward slightly, not angry, just final. "Some of you will never work here," she said. Then leaned back. And the room sat still. Breath held, egos shattered, reputations leaking onto the carpet, like the coffee still drying on her clothes. No one spoke. Ava sat quietly at the head of the table, her hands resting on the closed notebook like it held a gavel. The HR director stepped forward, her tablet in hand, eyes firm. "What happened in this room," she said coldly, "was recorded." Murmurs. One woman gasped. "We have hidden security footage and full audio," she continued. "Not for surveillance, for integrity. This was a stress test of more than just creativity." Blake's mouth opened, then closed. The man in the gray suit turned pale. Clara tried to smile, but it cracked halfway. "I didn't mean—" "You did," Ava said softly. "And more importantly, you meant to be seen doing it. That's worse." The woman with the rose gold laptop muttered, "We were just playing along." "With what?" Ava asked, her voice calm. "Mocking someone who looked different? Assuming someone couldn't belong because they wore a cotton blouse instead of silk?" No answer. She opened her notebook. "I took notes on everything. Not just what you said, but when you said it. Who laughed? Who recorded? Who looked away and let it happen?" She pointed to a page. "Clara laughed when coffee was spilled, mocked my clothes, suggested I was a janitor." Clara's lips trembled. Ava flipped another page. "Blake asked for coffee, joked about diversity hires, implied I printed my resume at a bus stop." Blake stared at the floor. "Rachel filmed the incident, sent it to others, called me cursed." Rachel's eyes welled. "I didn't send it anywhere else." Ava looked at her. It was already enough. The HR director spoke again. "You were all selected not just for experience, but for ethics, integrity, awareness. This was your moment to show it." She tapped her tablet. "Instead, we now have transcripts that show every comment, every recording attempt, and every insult, all tied to names." One woman stood up suddenly. I have references, campaigns, my portfolio." "And none of that matters," Ava interrupted, "because we saw the truth when you didn't think anyone was watching." The man with the startup badge stuttered, "People joke when they're nervous." "I didn't mean it." Ava didn't blink. "People reveal themselves when they're comfortable." Silence. The HR director cleared her throat. "Effective immediately. Your applications are withdrawn. Your names will be red-flagged in our system. Veriton Global will not recommend you to any of our partner agencies." A few gasped. "You're blacklisting us?" someone whispered. Ava leaned forward, voice low and razor-sharp. "Number you blacklisted yourselves." Someone near the back broke into tears. Another quietly gathered their resume and folded it into their briefcase like it was radioactive. Clara finally spoke. "Please, this can't be how it ends." Ava turned to her, face calm. "Clara, this wasn't an end. This was your beginning. The beginning of your undoing." She stood. Her blouse still showed faint marks from the coffee and water. Her notebook looked older now, more worn, but she stood taller than anyone else in that room. "I didn't come here to punish anyone," she said. "I came here to see who deserved to build the future with me." She paused. "And you've all answered." With that, Ava turned and walked toward the door, her flats silent, her back straight. No one followed. No one dared. She didn't look back. Didn't need to. The shame in that room was enough to collapse every brand name, every flashy resume, every fake smile that had once tried to drown her dignity. And now? It was Ava Harris who'd written the final word. A week passed. The 47th floor conference room stayed quiet. No more polished shoes clicking with entitlement. No more laughter echoing over cheap jokes. Just silence and the faint memory of what had happened. The story didn't go public. But inside the company, it spread like wildfire. Not through press releases, through whispers in elevators, glances in cafeterias, and hushed conversations behind closed doors. She didn't even flinch, someone whispered. They poured coffee on her, said another. She didn't move, just took notes. They laughed, until she stood up. And just like that, everything started shifting. Office staff who were once ignored were now greeted. Assistants were treated with respect. Janitors were thanked. Receptionists were spoken to, not waved off. The quietest people in meetings were now the ones others leaned in to hear. Not because of fear, because Ava was watching. Not lurking, leading. And no one wanted to be the next one on that list. Ava didn't release a company memo. She didn't announce changes with a bold speech. She just walked through the building like she had when she first entered, silent, observant, and deeply aware. But this time, every room straightened when she did. New policies started rolling in. Unconscious bias training wasn't optional anymore. HR added interview observers, silent evaluators, in all hiring panels. Cameras were installed in all conference rooms. Not for security, for accountability. The culture started shifting like a tide turning. One woman who had mocked Ava in the original interview sent an email asking for a second chance. The reply was one line: "We've moved forward." A man who had snickered into his phone during the spill scene posted a long apology on LinkedIn. It got shared and then taken down. Rumors spread that some of the rejected candidates were blacklisted across 3 major media firms in the Northeast. No one confirmed it. No one had to. Because everyone saw what came next. Ava didn't hide in a corner office. She made rounds. She sat in brainstorming sessions with interns and junior designers. She asked questions like, "Who doesn't speak enough here?" Or, "Whose idea got skipped?" And then she listened. Really listened. People started coming alive. A Hispanic junior staffer said during a team lunch, "She looked at me like I was the CEO." A black assistant said, "First time I've ever seen someone who looks like me, not just in charge, but respected." The security guard at the front entrance, who no one had ever remembered by name, was now greeted every morning by Ava personally. "Morning, Dante," she'd say, coffee in one hand, confidence in the other. He'd nod back, smiling like his uniform finally meant something. Even the board started noticing. Revenue hadn't changed yet, but culture had. Turnover dropped. Internal complaints fell. Collaboration went up. People stopped performing and started participating. The old power players who remained became quieter. Not scared, aware. One executive whispered during a quarterly review, "We're not just working for Ava. We're working in her reflection." And yet Ava never raised her voice, never called anyone out publicly. Her notebook remained on her desk, always open, always being written in. Not out of paranoia, out of purpose. She wasn't recording offenses anymore. She was recording ideas, faces, moments worth growing. She wasn't building revenge. She was building a culture, one conversation at a time. And slowly, the office became hers, not through titles, not through fear, but through respect. Because everyone now knew, real leadership doesn't need to yell. It just moves differently. The 50th floor was quiet. Floor-to-ceiling windows framed the New York skyline. The lights below blinked like stars, but Ava Harris wasn't looking at them. She sat at her desk, alone, coffee in hand. Her blouse today was cream, clean, crisp. Her hair still natural, tied back the same way it had been when they laughed at her. But there were no laughs now. Just silence. Powerful, earned silence. The notebook sat beside her, still water-stained from that day, still bent in the corners, still full of names, words, and observations. She hadn't thrown it away. It sat there not as a reminder of what they did, but of what she didn't. She hadn't screamed, hadn't demanded respect, hadn't posted a viral video. She'd walked in, been humiliated, and sat through it. Because she knew something they didn't. The ones who speak the loudest rarely hold the most power. Real power walks quietly and leaves no room for doubt. Ava reached for her notebook and opened it slowly. The last page had a single sentence written in her tight, controlled handwriting. "They never saw me coming." She smiled, just slightly. A quiet knock at the door. Her assistant stepped in, a young black woman with tight curls and wide, watchful eyes. "Ms. Harris," she said, holding a file, "the new hires just arrived. Want me to show them to the conference room?" Ava nodded once. "I'll be there in 5. The assistant paused. "Anything else?" Ava looked at her. "You doing all right?" The woman blinked, then smiled. "Yes, ma'am. I am now." Ava nodded again. The door closed softly behind her. Outside, the company moved like a machine, but a different kind of machine now. Meetings didn't start with titles anymore. They started with names. Elevator rides were no longer silent. People greeted each other, not because they had to, but because they finally noticed each other. Ava didn't attend every meeting, but her presence was always in the room. People remembered. They remembered the spilled coffee, the laughter, the phones raised to record a humiliation that turned into a legacy. They remembered how they felt when the woman they mocked stood at the head of the table and rewrote the rules. Some of them had left. Some had been removed. Others stayed, changed, and humbled. Clara never came back. Her name floated in conversations, whispered like a ghost of arrogance past. Blake deleted all his socials. Rachel now worked freelance, quietly. But the real story wasn't about them. It was about everyone who stayed behind and learned. People like Dante at security, who now trained new guards not just on protocol, but on respect. People like Ava's assistant, who walked taller now. People like the intern, who was told her natural hair wouldn't be polished enough, and now ran the company's digital creative team. Ava stood and walked toward the window. The city below moved fast, unaware of the small revolution happening inside Veriton Global. She took a breath, not because she was tired, but because even now, she carried it. The pressure, the legacy, the reminder that for people who look like her, silence is not weakness. It's strategy, strength, timing. She reached for the framed photo on the edge of her desk. Not of her, of her grandmother, standing in front of a school she wasn't allowed to enter in the 60s. Ava placed it back down gently, then closed the notebook. Her footsteps toward the door were soft. She didn't grab a coat, didn't need a speech, didn't check her reflection. Because she knew the truth. She didn't have to prove anything anymore. They had already learned, and those who hadn't Would. With or without her. She opened the door. The hallway beyond was quiet, waiting. A few junior staffers looked up as she passed. Every one of them stood. She nodded once, said nothing, just walked. Because Ava Harris didn't have to announce who she was. She'd already done that, not with words, not with titles, but by sitting down, saying nothing, and still owning the entire room.